I never imagined the day would come when I'd walk into my own home and find my world shattered there. She was my beautiful wife, tangled in the arms of another man. My heart pounded, my vision blurred, and the rage inside me exploded. The betrayal was a knife twisting deeper with every second I confronted them, fueling my desire for revenge. Welcome to the Love and Betrayed Love channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. I never imagined the day would come when I'd walk into my own home and find my world shattered there. She was my beautiful wife, tangled in the arms of another man. My heart pounded, my vision blurred, and the rage inside me exploded. The betrayal was a knife twisting deeper with every second I confronted them, my fists flying, my soul breaking, the chaos, the tears, the desperate pleas. It all fueled my desire for revenge. As I walked away, leaving the wreckage behind, I knew nothing would ever be the same. This was just the beginning of my retaliation. Ethan Hart stopped for the night where the South Fork of the Boise River turned north. According to his map, Montana and Wyoming were to the northeast. He let his horse Blackie and his pack horse Jewel graze nearby. Then he built a fire and cooked some beans. After eating, he checked on the horses and laid out his bedroll, just like he'd done every night since leaving his mining camp near Idaho City. Ethan had two reasons for leaving. First, someone wanted to kill him. Second, he had a pouch of gold coins tied to his suspenders. He had worked hard for those coins and had lost his partner, Samuel Connor, in the process. Now he hoped to start fresh, far from any gold mine. He and Samuel had staked a claim on Crooked Creek. They panned for gold for a year, then decided to use a SLES box to get more gold. Panning was slow because the gold was mixed with sand and gravel. The SLES box worked better thanks to Samuel's education. Samuel had learned about a technique while studying in Boston. His professor mentioned that ancient Greeks used sheep wool to trap gold in a SLES. They got a sheepskin in Boise and used it in their SLES, and it worked great. They soon began selling their gold every Sunday in Boise and splitting around 100 each week. Unlike other miners, they didn't go to saloons or brothel. Instead, they saved up several hundred each. They were also careful about showing their money. A miner showing too much cash could get robbed. In Boise one Sunday in May, they met a man named Mr. Victor Grantham. Dressed like a businessman, he offered to buy their claim for 100 each. Ethan and Samuel had heard of Grantham and didn't trust him. They knew they could make more money in another month, so they refused his offer. Grantham smiled and said he'd be in Boise if they changed their mind. Then he walked away. Ethan and Samuel went back to their claim. That afternoon, Ethan went on foot to hunt for meat while Samuel stayed to fix the SLES. Ethan was half a mile away when he heard two gunshots. He ran back and heard voices as he got close, moving from tree to tree. He saw two men talking near Samuel's body. Ethan felt a cold fear at their words. Well, the other one's got to be here somewhere. There are two bedrolls, so they both worked this claim. Grantham won't pay us unless we get both of them. I know, but where did he go? Their horses are still here, so he's on foot and can't be far. It's getting dark. We won't find him now. Let's leave everything and come back tomorrow before dawn. He'll come back for food. When he sees his partner dead, he'll want to bury him. He'll wait till morning, and that's when we'll get him. After the men left, Ethan went to Samuel's body. He knew what happened. Rumor had it that Grantham wanted minor claims. If you didn't sell, you'd be shot dead, and Grantham would take over with no local authorities. No one would be arrested. Ethan had thought this was just drunk miners' talk, even though he knew of two miners who disappeared after they vanished. Grantham would wait, file a claim, and bring in Chinese miners to work the site. When Ethan first heard these stories, he thought the miners left on their own. Many men came to the goldfields with dreams of getting rich but left when they ran out of money. Now Ethan knew different. Grantham did this to him and Samuel. Staying at the claim would mean death for Ethan. Reporting Samuel's death was useless. Nothing would be done, and Ethan had no time to bury him. He needed to move fast. Ethan needed to get away from those two men, and fast he saddled his horse Blackie and loaded up Jewel, the pack horse. He and Samuel had used to carry all their stuff from California to Idaho for mining. He filled the panniers with food and ammo from their tent, taking anything he might need. Searching Samuel's body for money. He found none. He figured. The killers took it. Ethan left Samuel's body where it was, hoping another miner would find and bury him and then spread the news. It was dark when Ethan climbed onto Blackie and guided him into the forest. His plan was to be over the other side of the hill by dawn. It would be slow and tricky, but Blackie knew the way. The night was clear, so Ethan used the Big Dipper to guide him. Ethan aimed to cross the North Fork of the Boise River and follow the South Fork to the north side of the Soldier Mountains. According to the map he bought with Samuel in California, this route would lead him into the high desert of southeast Idaho Territory. From there he'd head to either Wyoming or Montana. He wasn't sure. Yet all he knew was if he stayed at the Crooked Creek claim he'd be dead by morning. Ethan considered Wyoming or Montana because he thought he could find work there. He'd worked on a ranch in California when gold was found there. Hearing stories of miners striking it rich, he decided to try gold mining. His dream was to save enough to buy a ranch, but soon realized he knew nothing about finding gold. Samuel saved Ethan's dream, a teacher from Boston. Samuel came to California to hunt for gold and knew a lot about the subject. He had studied history, geography and geology, so he understood mining methods. They teamed up because Ethan had horses and Samuel needed transport together in California. They mined until the gold ran out. Then they headed to Idaho hoping to find another claim. They did well at Crooked Creek, but after the killers showed up, Ethan knew he had to leave. He decided to return to cattle ranching, and the money he had hidden in his pants would give him a good start by dawn. Ethan was riding on the floodplain of the North Fork of the Boise River. He found a place to cross, then rode west for an hour before stopping. He was only 10 miles from the Crooked Creek camp but hoped the men were still searching there. He knew he left a trail but didn't think the men were skilled trackers. They seemed more like desperate miners working for Grantham. Ethan fried some bacon and corn cakes, then continued west. He saw the Soldier Mountains in the distance and altered his path to stay north of them. He crossed the South Fork of the Boise River and stopped to eat again after 13 hours of riding. He and the horses were tired. He let them graze while he ate more corn cakes and drank water from the river. In an hour he was riding west again as the sun set. Ethan stopped beside a creek, too tired to make a fire. He let the horses graze, ate more corn cakes and unrolled his bedroll. He checked the horses once more, took out his money pouch, hid it under his bedroll's canvas tarp and went to sleep. Ethan woke up cold. He gathered wood and started a fire once it burned down to coals. He made coffee. He ate the last of his corn cakes, finished his coffee and got the horses ready. He packed up, put out the fire, tied Jewel to Blackie's saddle and rode west. An hour later Ethan came to a creek. He crossed it and adjusted his path towards the south side of a distant mountain range. Ethan's map showed the Sawtooth Mountains. If he stayed on the south side, he'd reach the desert in southeastern Idaho. He wasn't rushing anymore because he thought the two Grantham men had given up. He walked at a slower pace, giving his horses a break by noon. He guessed he was halfway between the Soldier Mountains and the Sawtooths. As the sun set, he crossed a stream and decided to camp there. In 2 or 3 more days he'd hit the desert and then choose whether to head to Wyoming or Montana. The next morning, Ethan woke up and went to the stream. He wanted wood for a fire and water for his coffee pot. He was waiting for his coffee. When something hit his head he fell back, hearing a rifle shot lying on his bedroll. He tried to move, but couldn't. Blood dripped down his head and he smelled it. He knew who had shot him. Only 2 people had a reason to. About 10 minutes later he heard familiar voices. "Silas, you almost missed. We were farther away than I thought, but I hit him and is bleeding bad. Want me to end it? No need, he'll die by night. No sense wasting a bullet on him. He us on a chase, left a trail and fur to follow. He deserves to die here." Shouldn't we take him back to Grantham? He'll want proof. We'll take his horses and supplies. Without them he won't last long. That's enough proof. Catch the horses. I'll see if he has any money. Ethan felt hands searching him. The man cursed no money. Maybe that other guy was right. Said he was keeping Ethan's money, got over 300 from him. Doesn't matter. Grantham will pay us for the job and we'll sell his horses and rig for more. The other man returned. Horses are ready. Leo, should we take his bedroll? The man on the horse spat. Do you want a bedroll with his blood on? It'll wash. Well, you wash it then. His saddle will buy 3 bedrolls. I'm heading back to Boise, got someone waiting for me. She'll see me twice before you get back. Ethan lay still as they rode off, with everything he had except his bedroll and a pouch of coins he'd hidden. He wished he could just sit up. He blacked out, thanking Samuel for lying about the money. Ethan woke to a woman's voice. He couldn't understand her esnu nor zara nego zur arala. He lay still listening when she repeated it. He knew he wasn't dreaming. He also heard dogs panting. He tried to sit up but couldn't. He answered. Where am I? Who are you? The woman spoke again, this time in broken English. Ah, you American. I thought Basque, only Basque shepherds here. Ethan didn't know the word Basque. What is Basque? I tell you later. I need to move. If I leave you die. Can you walk? My wagon is not far. I'll try, but I need help. She was strong as she helped him sit. He noticed she was likely pretty, with dark brown hair and darker skin. You must be Mexican. I am Basque, not Mexican. Now stand up and come to my wagon. I will take care of you. Ethan felt for the pouch under his bedroll one moment. I need to get something. He found the drawing and tucked the pouch into his trousers. Then he turned to her. I think I can walk if you help me up. With her help and his effort, he stood. He almost fell on his first step, but she caught him. Lean on me, she said, leading him. Ethan followed. It was slow, but he could walk this way, she said by the time they reached her wagon. Ethan's eyes had focused better. Her wagon was unlike any he'd seen. It had 1 horse, not 2, and looked like the cover wagons from his trip from Missouri to California, but different. It had more boards on the sides, making it wider, with wheels underneath. The top was straight and there was no driver's seat. Instead, it had what looked like the front door of a house right over, where the wooden shafts and single harness connected to the front wheels. The woman stepped on the harness, opened the door and then stepped back down. You go up, she said, pushing Ethan forward with much effort and the woman pushing on his hips. Ethan Jaob climbed onto the harness and through the open door she followed him. Inside you sit on bed. I check your head. What she called a bed was actually a mattress spread across the back of the wagon on wooden planks that made the wagon wider. Ethan sat down while the woman left and came back with a pot of water. She picked up a towel from somewhere Ethan couldn't see. She dipped the edge of the towel into the water and then cleaned the wound on Ethan's head. He'd grimaced in pain and her voice softened. I think you live bullet. Just cut skin, didn't go inside. Not much bleeding. Now I clean it and put on a bandage. You rest on bed until I camp. Then I make food. After wiping the dirt and blood from his wound, the woman tore a strip from another towel and tied it over the wound and around his head. Then she told him to lie down and rest. Ethan lay down but kept his face turned so he could see the woman. What she did next was something he had never seen before. It wasn't unusual to see a woman driving a wagon, but they usually did so from a seat. This wagon had 2 parts to its door, a solid lower part and an upper part with a window. The woman stood in front of the open window part and drove the 1 horse from there. When Ethan felt the wagon go downhill, the woman pulled a lever beside her, which seemed like the brake lever on any other wagon he'd seen. He heard the screeching sound of wood rubbing against iron and felt the wagon slow down. When the wagon leveled out again, she released the lever and the wagon sped up. Ethan tried to stay awake, but he was too tired. The stress from his wound and the effort of getting into the wagon had drained his strength. He fell asleep to the rocking of the wagon and the strange sounds the woman made. He sometimes heard her voice, speaking words that he didn't understand. When Ethan woke up, the wagon wasn't moving, his head hurt and the woman wasn't there. It took him a while to sit up, but once he did and his head stopped throbbing. He looked around the inside of the wagon. The back of the wagon was closed with boards except for a small window. The floor looked like any farm wagon. He'd seen just some boards running the length of the wagon, making a wagon bed about 3 feet wide and 10 foot longitude. There were sideboards, like a farm wagon used for carrying grain, but after that nothing looked the same. Attached to the sideboards were 2 other boards on each side about 2 feet wide, and parallel to the floor they formed a bench, making it possible to put a bed in the back of the wagon wide enough for him to stretch out. These benches continued all the way to the front of the wagon with sideboards of their own about a foot tall. Wood boughs from these sideboards formed the roof of canvas in the center of the wagon. Hanging from a hook on the top bow was a kerosene lantern. In the front left corner of the wagon next to the door was a small cast iron stove with a smoke pipe that went up through the canvas roof. There was tin on the wood next to the stove to protect the wood from the heat. On the left-hand bench behind and to the side of the stove was a small cabinet with doors that latched in front on the right hand. Sideboard at the level of the bench was a brake lever similar to any other wagon brake, but shorter. Ethan was trying to stand up when the woman opened the door and came inside. She looked at Ethan and smiled. "Better," Ethan nodded. "My head still hurts, but I think so," she smiled again. "Sid, I check your head again." The woman gently removed the strip of towel from Ethan's head and touched the wound. "No more bleeding, but needs cleaning." Ethan sat still as she gently wiped his head with a wet cloth, then dried it. When she finished, she stepped back and smiled. "Clean now, you get well, fast. You hungry?" Ethan was hungry, but he had another problem that needed attention. "Yes, but I need to go outside first." The woman nodded. "We go now." "Then I cook food. I put steps to make it easier." Ethan shook his head. "I need to do this by myself. Do you understand?" The woman grinned. "I understand, but Awry and Princessa don't know you. I need to tell them. You are a friend." Ethan furrowed his brow. "You live with 2 other people in this wagon." She chuckled. "Awry and Princessa aren't people. They are dogs, Bud and Nesca are dogs too. Barra and Nesca make the sheep go where I want them. Awry and Princessa watch the sheep at night. We go tell Awry and Princessa. You are a friend. Then I come back and make food." The woman helped Ethan stand up and then helped him to the door. When she opened the door, Ethan looked out at a sight he'd never dreamed of seeing. Ethan figured he must have been dazed by the shot to his head, and that's why he hadn't seen the dogs or the sheep before, but now he did. The wagon sat in the middle of a valley between some foothills and beside a small stream. In front of the wagon, Ethan saw so many sheep that it looked like a sea of white wool. He heard the sheep softly saying "ba." He looked down and noticed 2 small dogs next to the wagon. They were about 2 feet tall, a bit thin, and had long reddish-brown fur. He wondered how such small dogs could take care of all the sheep. The woman answered his unspoken question. "These are Barao and Nesca." She pointed at the sheep next. "Those are Awry and Princessa. You wait here. I'll bring them to the wagon." The woman stepped down from the wagon, raised her voice and called, "Awry, Princessa, come here." Ethan couldn't see any dogs among the sheep at first, but soon 2 white dogs with long fur came trotting up. They were as tall as the sheep. One of the dogs was almost as heavy as a sheep, while the other was a bit smaller but still big. Both dogs slowed down when they saw Ethan standing in the wagon door. The larger dog began to bark, making a deep threatening sound. A moment later, the other dog barked too, not as deep but equally threatening. The woman patted her leg and said, "Come here again." The dogs walked slowly to her but kept looking at Ethan when they reached her. They sat down but still watched him closely. The woman petted each dog and said, "This man is my friend. He will not hurt me or our sheep. He wants to be your friend too. Come greet him." She then looked up at Ethan. "Come down slowly and walk to me, smile." They understand a smile. "Then I'll touch your arm, so they know you're not a threat." Ethan carefully stepped down and walked toward the woman. He noticed the dog still watching him. The woman spoke softly to them, which seemed to calm them down. Both dogs kept watching as the woman touched his arm. She repeated, "This man is my friend. He will not hurt me or our sheep." She turned to Ethan. "I told them you are my friend and want to be their friend. Hold your hand out with the backup so they can smell you. They won't hurt you if you don't move fast." The larger dog cautiously approached Ethan when he held out his hand. The woman said, "This is awry, smile and say his name." Ethan tried to smile, though he was nervous about the dog. "Hello there, Arya." The dog sniffed Ethan's hand and then sat down. The other dog came up next, followed by the woman. "This is Prina, do the same." Ethan smiled and said, "Hello there, Princessa." The dog sat down too. The woman patted both dogs and then said, "Go watch the sheep." The dogs trotted back to the sheep. The woman turned to Ethan, "Then I told them to watch the sheep. They know you now, but they won't be your friends right away. It takes time. Do what you need to do, but stay away from the sheep. You'll be safe with that." The woman went back into the wagon. As Ethan walked a little away, he heard a clattering sound, as if she was setting a pot on a stove. Ethan was only gone for a few minutes. When he came back, smoke was rising from the stovepipe sticking out of the wagon's roof. He quickly walked to the wagon, climbed up the steps and went inside. The woman was bent over a pot on the stove. "Smoke's coming out of the stovepipe. Your wagon might catch fire." The woman smiled and pointed to a tin plate around the stovepipe in the roof. "Tin keeps the top from catching fire. I'm making a awry arrow for to eat. Maybe you'll like it." Ethan shook his head. "I've never heard of it. What's in it?" The woman smiled. "You're not Basque, so you don't know it's fish stew. It has salt, cod, tomato, potato, onion, garlic and peppers. My mother taught me how to make it in the old country. You rest while I cook. Then we eat." About half an hour later the woman walked over to Ethan and said, "Get up now, we need the table." Ethan got up and the woman pulled out a small table from under the bed. She pointed to a bench and said, "Sit, I'll bring the food." When she put a bowl in front of him and gave him a spoon, Ethan wasn't sure what he was about to eat. He dipped his spoon in and smelled it. He mostly smelled garlic. The first taste convinced him that it was good. The woman brought a bowl and sat across from him. "What do you think? Does it taste good?" Ethan nodded. "I've never had anything like it before, but it's good." She smiled. "I haven't made it since Audie was killed by a bear. It feels good to make it again. It feels good to make good food for a man." "Was Audie another of your dogs?" The woman shook her head. "Audie was my husband." Ethan put down his spoon. "How did you start herding sheep if you were married?" "Where I come from. Married women keep house and have children. They don't do men's work." The woman smiled. "We eat then, I tell you." When they finished eating, the woman washed the bowls and spoons and put them away. Then she came back to the table and sat down. She smiled as she spoke. "I am Barazia Rolla, born in Argentina. My father took the family to Argentina because he didn't like what was happening in the Basque country. We lived in Argentina until I was 8. Then my father took us to California to sell meat to miners. We lived there until I was 20 and I met Audie Aldana. He was Basque like me. We got married and Audie worked as a sheep herder. I worked as a cook at a hotel when gold was found in Idaho. The sheep owner said the miner ERS needed food and told Audie to take the sheep from California to Idaho. Audie agreed and I went with him. It took us 6 weeks to get to Idaho. The sheep owner told us to take the sheep to the mountains to graze. He gave us a wagon, food and some dogs. I went with Audie. One day the dogs barked a lot. Audie went to see why they were barking. He thought a wolf was trying to kill the sheep. He found a bear instead. Audie knew about wolves and coyotes, but not about bears. He tried to scare the bear away, but the bear killed him. I didn't know what to do. Audie was dead and I was alone. Audie had promised the sheep owner he would bring the sheep back when the mountains got too cold, so I decided to do the same. I buried Audie beside a tree in the mountains, then took the sheep to the high pastures. When the snow came, I brought the sheep back to the sheep owner. The sheep owner asked who had driven the sheep. Since Audie was not with me, I told him a bear killed Audie and that I had driven the sheep. I asked if I could drive the sheep next spring. He said he wouldn't pay a woman to drive the sheep. I told him to give me 50 lambs if I drove the sheep. He said he would try me out. I took the sheep to the mountain pastures and brought them back. He said I did a good job and gave me 50 more lambs. Last year I sold the boy lambs and kept the girl lambs. Now the girl lambs have 23 OS and 52 lambs. Soon I will be a sheep owner, not just a sheep herder. I like being a sheep herder. Sheep and dogs are better than people don't like Basque. They think we are dumb because we don't speak English. I learned English in California, so people wouldn't think I'm dumb. They still think I'm dumb because I'm Basque. Sheep and dogs don't care if I speak Basque or English. The woman smiled then. I told you my story. Now you tell me who you are, why you are here where only Basques are and why you got shot. Ethan told her the story of mining gold in California and then moving to Idaho with Samuel. He told her about how Samuel was killed and that he had heard the killer say they were going to kill him too. I left that night thinking they wouldn't be able to follow me, but I guess they did. I'd have been dead if you hadn't found me, because they left me with no food and no way to travel. I was just trying to get to Wyoming or Montana. I still am. Can you take me to where there are people, so I can get another horse and some supplies? I have some money to pay you. Isabella thought before answering. She had to say no, because she had promised to take the flock to the mountain pastures, where they would fatten over the summer and be ready to sell in the fall. That wasn't all she was thinking, though. Even though Ethan had only been with her for a day, it was nice having someone to talk to. She thought being alone with only the dogs was enough, but Ethan had made her realize she was lonely. No, the sheep need to go to the mountains. We won't come back until the snow comes. If we go back now, the lambs won't get fat. They won't bring much money and the sheep owner will not be happy. My lambs won't be happy either. Ethan shrugged. Then I'll have to start out on foot. I knew Ethan couldn't walk back to the sheep ranch, but there was a way Ethan could get back to where he could buy a horse and supplies. About once a month, the sheep owner sent a man with a pack horse loaded with food for her. Ethan could ride the pack horse back down the mountain. When she thought about Ethan leaving, she knew it was selfish, but she decided not to tell him there is no horse and no food. How will you get to people? I drive sheep for 14 days and don't see anyone except you. It might take you 10 days to walk and there are no people where the sheep owner's ranch is. He is not Basque, so he won't help you. Like me. You stay with me. We will come back down when the snow comes. Then you can go to Wyoming or Montana. Berry smiled. Then we each do our part. You bring water and wood for the stove. I cook and wash clothes. Now it's night and still cold. We need more fire to keep warm and then we sleep. Ethan watched as Isabella added some wood to the tiny stove and adjusted the damper. He understood what she was doing, because the stove worked like the one at his childhood home. By controlling the air, the fire would burn slowly and keep the wagon warm. There would be a few coals left in the morning to start a fire for breakfast. He remembered his mother doing the same thing every night, though she let the fire burn out in the summer. Beezy stood up with a flaming sliver of wood and lit the lantern. She then turned to Ethan. Just one bed, but big enough for two. You sleep in the back. I sleep close to the stove, so the fire doesn't go out. Ethan frowned. We're going to sleep in the same bed. Where else would you sleep? Ethan pointed to the floor. I'll sleep here in my bedroll. You don't have a bedroll. It's back where I found you. We need my blankets on the bed. Well, it wouldn't be proper to sleep with you, would it? Beezy shrugged. There are no people here at night. It gets cold and two people are warmer than one. The dogs don't care. The sheep don't care. I don't care. Why do you care? It's just that when a man and a woman sleep together, it usually means something else too. Beezy frowned for Basque. If not married. It means no touching like that. It doesn't mean not sleeping in the same bed now. You go outside, when you come back I go outside, you get in bed, I come back, blow out the lantern and then get in bed. Ethan went outside and took care of his needs, then stopped on his way back to the wagon. In the dim light, he saw the flock of sheep. Most were lying down for the night, just like the cattle he'd had on the edge of the group. Ethan saw Ariga and Princesa slowly walking around. When he got back to the wagon, he saw Barra and Nesca curled up together fast asleep. Ethan thought that animals had it easier than people. Sheep did sheep things and dogs did dog things. They didn't need to do anything else. People had to do much more. Ethan was about to go to bed with a woman who wasn't his wife. She was also a woman he didn't know. Well, he wasn't a very religious man, but he knew it wasn't something good people did. It also bothered him that Berisi didn't seem to mind. Shouldn't any woman feel it was wrong to sleep with a man? She didn't know. If it didn't bother Beri, what did that say about her and what did it say about him? For even thinking about it, Ethan opened the door to the wagon and stepped inside. I'm done so. It's your turn now. Don't worry, I won't look when you get into bed. When Beezy closed the door, Ethan took off his boots, pants and shirt. He climbed into bed wearing his long underwear. A few minutes later, Beezy came back inside, took down the lantern and blew out the flame. Ethan heard her clothes rustling and then felt her slip under the blankets. Ethan woke up to the sound of the door opening and closing. It took him a few seconds to remember where he was. Then he looked to see if RZY was still in bed. She wasn't, and it looked like she had been up for a while, though the inside of the wagon was still dark. He saw a flicker of flames coming from the stove. When he looked out the window, he saw the light purple sky that comes just before sunrise. Ethan got dressed and stepped out the door of the wagon. He saw Isabella about 100 feet away carrying a bucket. She must have dressed, started the fire and walked to the creek for water. When Beri got back to the wagon, Ethan smiled. I thought you said I should get the water. Isabella smiled back at him. I do this every morning. Forget it. You do it tomorrow. We need more wood for the stove. You get that while I make breakfast. It was almost daylight. Ethan walked to the creek, took care of himself and then looked for any dry branches. The stove was small. He remembered that BZI only used wood about the size of a broom handle, so he broke off a bunch of small branches and carried them back to the wagon. Ethan dropped the branches, walked up the steps and opened the door. Isabella was bent over a skillet, stirring something that smelled like onions and garlic. Isabella turned when he walked in. Need to bake eggs. Then done, pull out the table. I'll get you coffee. Ethan sat down and pulled the little table from under the bed. Isabella set a tin cup of steaming coffee in front of him. Half sugar but no milk. Ethan picked up the cup and smiled. Black is fine. Ethan always thought ranch hands made strong coffee, but this coffee was even stronger. It wasn't bad, just very strong. He took another sip and it didn't seem as strong. He set the cup down to cool. A couple minutes later, Beezy Eye set a plate in front of him and handed him a fork. Eat, need food to keep going. As Bersy brought her own plate and cup of coffee. Ethan looked at his breakfast. It looked like tomatoes and onions with 2 eggs and of course garlic. He took a bite and was surprised by the sharp taste of a chili pepper. He looked up at Berry. You put chili peppers in eggs? She grinned. Basque food has peppers like Mexican food. That's because the Basque country is next to Spain. They aren't real Basque peppers, but still good. After the second bite, Ethan decided Berry was right. He never thought of putting hot peppers in eggs, but with the tomatoes, onions and garlic, the peppers weren't too strong. They blended with the other flavors nicely. He smiled. Yes, this is good. You're a good cook. Bersy Berry blushed. Just cook, like Mother taught me. Ethan grinned. Well, I could get used to this. After another bite, Ethan looked at Isabella. So what do we do today? It looks like the sheep have plenty of food and water. How long are we staying here? Barazi shook her head. We don't stay. If the sheep stay too long, they eat everything and there won't be food. Next year we move. Every day we go to the mountains. After they finished eating, Isabella washed their plates and forks. She said she was going to harness the horse and hook it to the wagon. Ethan offered to do it, but Isabella shook her head. The horse doesn't know you. I'll hitch him this time. Maybe you can do it tomorrow. You put the wood under the stove. Ethan was amazed at how quickly Beezy Eye harnessed the gelding. She wasn't very tall, but the horse lowered his head for her. She put on the harness, lifted the steps back into the wagon, then backed the horse between the shafts and hooked the trace chains to the single tree. After buckling the straps and snapping the reins to the horse's bit, she climbed up into the wagon after fastening the top part of the door open. Isabella shouted "Ay la raza." Ethan saw Barra and Nesca running toward the sheep. After a few seconds to let the sheep start moving, Isabella clucked to the horse and the wagon began to roll. Ethan climbed up to sit next to Isabella on the bench with the sun in the sky. Ethan knew they were going north, moving up a valley between mountains on each side. It reminded him of herding cattle, except this time they had sheep, not cows. Back when he moved cattle, there were usually about 6 other ranch hands to help. Cows often tried to wander off and each ranch hand on his horse would steer them back to the group. But here it was just Isabella, Barao and Nesca. Ethan was amazed at how well the dogs kept the sheep together. When a few sheep strayed, Isabella would shout some words and one of the dogs would run and bring the lost sheep back to the flock. Sometimes different groups of sheep would try to go different ways. When that happened, Beezy Eye shouted more words and Ethan would see one dog guide one group back, while the other dog did the same for the other side. After seeing this a few times, Ethan asked Isabella how the dogs knew what to do. She grinned. Dogs learn as they grow, but how do they know which way to go? When the group split up, Ethan asked. Berry smiled. I tell them watch. A group of sheep had started to the left eating shrubs. Another group was on the opposite side of the flock. Beezy Eye shouted Aruri and Barra ran to her. The straying sheep. Beezy Eye then shouted at her. Ela and Nesca did the same, with the second bunch lagging behind. The dogs know Basque. Beezy Eye explained. I tell Baral to go one way and Nessa the other. If the sheep go slow, I say Ela, which means go faster. If they go too fast, I say Banura Etam, which means lay down and the dogs stop. It made sense to Ethan, except for one thing. What if you need one dog to go fast and the other one to go slow? Barazi smiled again. Barra knows one word and Nesca knows another for the same thing. Ethan shook his head. How do you keep it all straight? Beezy Eye pointed to her head. It's all up here, not hard. Just a few words fast, slow, stop, go right, go left, listen and watch, and you'll get it too. The next 2 days were much the same. Ethan would wake to find Bersy cooking breakfast. When he got up, Bersy didn't look back at him, but handed him a stew pot as he got dressed. Ethan would go to the nearby stream, relieve himself and fill the pot with water, then bring it back. Bersy would take the pot, fill the coffee pot and place it on the stove. A few minutes later she'd give Ethan his cup and say breakfast was nearly ready. They'd eat and then get ready to move further into the mountains on the second day. Bersy let Ethan harness the horse. Zaldy wasn't a big horse and he looked a bit thin from eating just grass. But he was well trained. He stood still while Ethan harnessed him and didn't resist. When Ethan backed him between the wagon shafts. Their midday meal was usually something quick, like ham and cheese. They ate fast because they needed to reach the mountains soon. The mountains were where the lambs would grow bigger and fetch a good price in the fall. Evenings were similar too. Bersy would stop the wagon and Bar and Nesca would herd the sheep together. They seemed to know what to do without being told when the wagon stopped. Barao and Nesca rounded up any stragglers until Araga and Princesa took their places. Then the dogs would come back to the wagon to be fed. Ethan would unhitch Zaldy, take off his harness and hobble him so he could graze safely. Then he'd gather enough firewood for cooking and to last through the night. Barazi would cook their meal after eating. Ethan would step outside to relieve himself while Bersy cleaned up. When he returned, she'd do the same while he got into bed. When Bersy came back, she'd blow out the lantern, undress and get into bed beside Ethan. Having Bersy next to him in bed felt strange for Ethan. After she blew out the lantern, he wondered what she wore to bed. Did she wear long underwear, like he did some women did, because they felt colder than men? His mother had worn long underwear from fall until spring. He'd never seen his mother in it, but he'd seen it hanging on the clothesline after she washed clothes. Other than that, Ethan wasn't sure what women wore to bed. His mother had called a piece of clothing a shames, which she wore under her dress. Maybe that's what Isabella wore to bed. The other thing that made Ethan uneasy was knowing what married couples did in bed. Having Bersy there stirred similar feelings in him during the day. Bersy worked in her dress, which didn't hide her figure much. Ethan had noticed her full chest, narrow waist and curvy hips. He thought she was very pretty, with a small expressive face framed by long dark brown hair and sparkling brown eyes. Her dress often hugged her body, making her look both desirable and pretty. Ethan didn't know what to do about that. Most nights he slept facing the small window at the back of the wagon. He could almost forget she was there, except for hearing her breathe. Sometimes Isabella would move in her sleep and her arm or leg would touch him. That was why Ethan slept facing the window. If he was turned away from Bersy, even if she woke up, she wouldn't see his embarrassing situation. It was early morning on the third day that Ethan woke up because Awry and Prina were barking in a low threatening way. He sat up and saw Barry adding wood to the stove. "Bersy, why are your dogs barking?" Bersy turned around and shrugged. "We are in the mountains. A wolf might come to eat the sheep. Dogs chase them away." Ethan listened to a little longer. The barking wasn't moving away. It was getting closer to the wagon. "Bersy, no wolf would come this close to the wagon, but your dogs are. That's not a wolf." Ethan saw the fear in B's eyes when she said she hoped it wasn't a bear. Ethan looked out the back window of the wagon and saw two men on horseback slowly coming toward the wagon. He recognized one of the horses as Blackie, the horse that had brought him from California to Idaho and from Idaho City to the place where Hastings his men had left him for dead. It had to be the same two men. Ethan got out of bed quickly and put on his trousers and shirt. He then asked Bersy if she had a gun. Bersy nodded. "Audie has a gun for hunting rabbit and bird." "Where is it?" "I think we're going to need it." Isabella opened a door under the bed and pulled out a single-barreled shotgun. She handed it to Ethan. A few seconds later she gave him a box of shotgun shells. Ethan had hoped the shotgun was a double barrel. Because there were two men coming with only one barrel. He would have to shoot one man, reload and then shoot the other. A lot could happen while he was reloading after Ethan had loaded the shotgun. BZI asked, "Are they the men who shot you? Why are they here?" Ethan nodded. "One of their horses." "Is my horse, the one they took from me when they left me for dead?" "I don't know why they are here." "How do they know you are here?" Ethan frowned. "They must have gone back to where they left me and found out I wasn't there. They would have seen the wagon tracks because the grass hasn't grown back yet. That would have told them. I was in the wagon, so they followed our trail. They can move about twice as fast as us, so they caught up." "What will you do?" Ethan looked back out the window, then turned to BZI. "When they get close enough, I'm going to shoot one, then shoot the other. They will kill me. They will kill you too, so you can't identify them. It's the only way to keep us both safe." Berry frowned. "They don't know. I will talk to them, tell them it's just me and I haven't seen any man. Maybe they will go away." Ethan put his hand on her shoulder. "BZI, you don't know what these men are like, but I do. If they think you're alone, that's not a risk you should take. All I need is one shot and a little time for a second. It'll work. You'll see." BZI understood Ethan's plan but didn't think it would work. She imagined Ethan shooting the first man and then the second man shooting Ethan. What happened after that was something she feared. Now that she liked having Ethan around, she didn't want him to die. BZI asked Ethan to look out the back window and see how close the men were when Ethan leaned over the bed. BZI opened the wagon door and walked down the steps. Ethan heard the sound just as he saw the men dismount about 10 feet from the wagon. Then he heard a familiar voice mourning, "We're looking for a friend of ours. He was headed to Montana and we decided to join him. Seen a man walking this way?" Bariza said she hadn't and the man spat on the ground. "Well, we followed him till we saw your wagon tracks. So he must be with you. I think we'll have a look inside this wagon ourselves. Silas, you watch this lady while I take a look afterwards." Ethan wasn't sure what had happened, because it went so fast and he couldn't see it all. Ethan was walking to the wagon door. When it opened, he recognized the man who had searched him for money. The man started to draw his pistol, but Ethan thumbed back the hammer on the shotgun and pulled the trigger. The man fell back down the steps. Ethan opened the shotgun to reload when he heard Baraza scream. He pulled out the spent shell, jammed another one in and ran to the door. He was just in time to see Awry and Princesa knock the second man to the ground, growling and barking over him. Ethan ran up, pointed the shotgun at the man's face and asked Isabella to call off her dogs once they sat down beside her. Ethan looked at the man. "Tell me why you're here. If you don't, I'll let these dogs tear you apart. They fight wolves, so you won't be much trouble for them. Maybe they'll bite your throat so you can't breathe, or maybe they'll just chew you up until you bleed to death." The man raised his arms, begging. "It wasn't me. It was Leo, the one you shot. Grantham didn't believe we'd killed you and he wasn't going to pay us until we proved it. I just wanted to sell your horses and be done with this, but Butch told Grantham we'd bring your body back so he could see it. We rode back to where I shot you, but you weren't. There wasn't any sign. The coyotes and vultures ate you, so we figured you were still alive. Leo said you would have needed help if you escaped, and he started looking around until he found some wagon tracks. He said we were going to follow those tracks until we found you and killed both you and anyone who helped you. I told Leo maybe we should just leave and forget about Grantham, but he said if we didn't find you and bring you back dead, Grantham would send someone else to kill us, so we couldn't talk. I heard Grantham had done that before, so I went along when I saw the woman. I knew I couldn't do it. I couldn't shoot a woman. I didn't even have my gun out. Ask her if you don't believe me." Ethan looked at Isabella and she nodded. He did not point the gun at me. Even after Awry and Princesa knocked him down. Ethan turned back to the man. "As I remember, you were pretty eager to finish me off the first time. How do I know you won't try it again? Maybe I should just shoot you, so I can be sure." The man was trembling. "Now, mister, I don't want anything but to get on my horse and head south back home to Utah. I used to be a ranch hand before the gold rush. That paid better and was a lot safer than mining gold. If you let me go, you'll never see me again. Ethan didn't really want to kill the man. He hadn't hesitated to kill Leo because he knew Leo would have killed him and probably Basie too. But this was different. This man, Silas, couldn't fight back and hadn't tried to hurt Isabella. He looked at Basie. What do you think? Biri Baraza frowned. You should shoot because he tried to shoot you, but he said he wouldn't let the other man hurt me. Ethan thought for a moment, then lowered the shotgun. Tell you what, Silas. I'll leave you better off than you left me. I'll leave you your horse and whatever you're carrying, except for your pistol and the rifle on your saddle. I'm going to keep those and I'm going to keep that black horse. That's the horse you took from me when you left me to die. Now lay that gun belt on the ground and then get up. We're going to walk to your horse and you're going to give me your rifle and any bullets you have. Then you're free to leave. But be warned. These two dogs know you and they know you were a threat to the woman. They'll smell you before you get close enough to hurt them, me or Barry, and they'll start to bark if you get close enough. They probably won't stop with just knocking you down again. 10 minutes later. Silas rode off to the south while Ethan held the Henry rifle. The man had carried B and Ethan watched until he was out of sight. Then Basie tugged at Ethan's sleeve. Why did you say awry and Princesa would bite the man? They only bark, not bite. They grew up with sheep and think they are sheep, not dogs. They just try to scare him. Well, I didn't know that, but neither did he. At least he rode off without hurting you. Do you think your sheep will eat too much if we stay here the rest of the day? I'm not sure. I trust that man. He doesn't have any guns now, but he could still manage to hurt us somehow. I still have to deal with the other body too, and that's going to take a while. Isabella shook her head. One day won't be too much. We'll stay, you bury the body. I will wash clothes in the stream 2 days later. Ethan and Barazi were eating their midday meal when they heard Ara and Princesa barking their warning barks. Ethan picked up the Henry rifle, checked to make sure it was loaded and then told Isabella to stay in the wagon while he went out to see why the dogs were barking. Barazi said there was no need. It's a man, but I knew he'd come. He'll bring more food. You're eating too. We need more. Ethan thought Baz's voice sounded odd. He looked at her and saw tears in her eyes. Biri, what's wrong? She sniffed. You'll want to go with him when he leaves. I don't want you to leave. Ethan laid the Henry rifle down on the bench of the wagon. Why didn't you say anything when I told you I was going to Montana or Wyoming? Biri SN again. Just thinking, then didn't know. Now I know, so I say. Ethan smiled because although Biri was different, she was still a woman and a woman he'd grown to like. She'd also changed. Well, she hadn't really changed, but the way he saw her had before. She'd been a woman who saved him from dying after being shot and a woman who had her own way of thinking about right and wrong. When he'd killed Leo, she didn't seem upset like most women would have been, and yet she'd taken mercy on Silas. Yes, she was more than all that, but above all, Isabella was a woman and he'd grown to trust her and appreciate what she could do. Over the past week or so, Basie was happy with her sheep and didn't need anything fancy that most women would think of as a necessity. I think I'll stay a while longer. I couldn't build much of a ranch before winter anyway. He grinned. And besides, I like how you cook. A few minutes later, a lone rider leading a pack horse stopped beside the wagon. Isabella and Ethan were outside waiting. The man took one look and frowned. Isabella. I thought you'd be by yourself. You need more than I brought. Isabella smiled. This is Ethan. I found him when he was hurt. He'll stay until the snow comes and help. We do need more food. Can you ask the sheep owner to send more? I'll pay him 2 lambs if he does. The man unloaded the bundles from the piers on his pack horse and then said he'd ask the sheep owner while BZI was carrying the packages inside the wagon to put them away. Ethan walked over to the man. "I appreciate you not saying anything about me being here with Berry and us not being married in all. Just like she said. All I do is help her when she needs it." The man shrugged. "I'm Basque, like BZI, and I've known BZI for 3 years. She cooks for the ranch in winter. She has had offers to be someone's wife, but always says no. She's a good woman. I believe what she says. The ranch owner likes Barazzi and wants her to stay well. He'll send someone back and in a couple of weeks with more food." "You see," Ethan smiled, "tell the ranch owner. I'm interested in buying some sheep once we get back. I thought about raising cattle, but now, after being with the sheep, I think they are easier." The man shook Ethan's hand and said, "I'll find you in 2 weeks." Then rode back down the trail. The next day, Barra and Nesca drove the sheep through the Galena summit into the Sawtooth Mountains. Ethan had never been this high before. The beautiful green valleys between the rugged mountains made him ask Berry to stop for a few minutes. Berry stopped the wagon and tied the reins. They both stepped outside. Berry smiled when Ethan said, "I've never seen anything like this before. Is it always this beautiful? Always food for sheep to grow fat? I love the mountains too, better than the desert." In winter, Ethan grinned. "I could live up here." I think Isabella chuckled. "When the snow comes, you'll change your mind. It's cold with lots of snow. Then you'll want to go to Montana or Wyoming." Ethan chose his words carefully. "Berry. I wanted to start a cattle ranch in Montana or Wyoming, but now I think sheep are better. Cattle need grass. Sheep eat almost everything. I'd never try to drive cattle up these slopes, but sheep handle them just fine. Being a sheep rancher sounds better. But I have a problem. I don't know much about sheep. I need a partner who knows about them. Do you know anyone who might help? I can't pay much to start, but as we grow we'd make enough for both." Berza looked at Ethan with tears in her eyes. "Why are you crying? I thought you'd be happy. I was really asking if you might want to be that partner. I need." BZI put her arms around Ethan's neck and smiled through her tears. "I know what you mean. I'm crying because I'm happy I wasn't looking for someone after Audie died, but I found you. I don't want you to ever go." Ethan smiled and hugged Isabella. "Don't worry, I told you you're too good a cook for me to leave." Isabella looked up. Is that the only reason Ethan hugged Isabella tighter? "No, it's not the only reason. I care about you a lot. I don't want to leave you or have you leave me. We can't do anything about it up here, but once we're back, we need to find a preacher or however Bass get married." That night as Barry cooked dinner, Ethan heard her singing softly. He asked what she was singing. Barry shrugged an old Basque song. "I sing when I'm happy. I'm happy." By the time Barazzi had driven the sheep to the northern pasture. It was the first week of September. One morning Ethan found frost on the ground. He told Isabella and she nodded. "I know snow will come soon. We need to head back." Ethan was sad to hear that the 3 months in the mountains were the happiest of his life. It was wild and peaceful. Going back meant that peace might end. People might question what he and Isabella did while they were in the mountains. Some might even accuse him of things because she couldn't fight back, but he was also happy. They were going back. Living with the woman who would be his wife was hard because he couldn't touch. Her days weren't much better. Baraz often hugged him and told him she was happy he'd stayed. Hearing her sing or hum made him happy too, by the time they started down the mountains. Isabella wasn't shy about hugging him tightly and kissing him good night and good morning. The trip back to the sheep run took almost a month. Like before, Isabella let the sheep graze slowly down the valleys. She said they had to go slow to keep the sheep fat. On the 28th of September, Ethan saw the sheep ranch buildings in the distance. There wasn't much around. He asked Bzi if that was all there was, and she nodded. Pens for sheep. A house for the owner and a house for workers. What do you do over the winter? Where do you stay? Bzi smiled. The worker house has a big kitchen stove. I cook for the workers. The owner lets me live in the wagon. Then Beri frowned, not sure what will happen now. Ethan tried to reassure her. The owner knows about me. The man who brought our food last time told me I don't think he'd make us leave. I'll go talk to him and tell him that as soon as we can, we're going to get married. About 3 hours later, after Bara and Neska had rounded up the sheep into a large fenced area, Beri drove the wagon to what Ethan thought was the owner's house. It didn't look very big or fancy, just like any farmhouse you'd find in Missouri. Isabella got out of the wagon, walked to the door and knocked. Someone opened the door and Isabella went inside. Almost half an hour later, Isabella came back out with an older man. They walked over to where Ethan was standing. Isabella pointed at Ethan. This is Ethan, the man I found hurt. Ethan. This is Mr. Donovan, the sheep owner. The man walked up to Ethan and offered his hand. Ethan shook it and the man smiled. I'm Robert Donovan. Berzy told me your story and honestly I'm not surprised. Gold can bring out the worst in people. I moved from Pennsylvania to California to find gold and get rich. What I learned was how the gold business really works. It's usually not the miners who get rich. Sure, some do hit it big, but someone always finds a way to take most of the money from them. The people who sell things to miners are the ones who make the real money, and there are men, like the ones you met, who use force to take a man's claim. I saw that a lot in California, just like it happened to you in Idaho. Bzi says you're done with gold mining. Do you have any plans for what you'll do next, besides marrying Bzy? Ethan felt nervous as he answered, we Beri and I were hoping we could stay here over the winter and then take your sheep back to the mountains. I have a little money and I'd like to buy a few sheep from you to start my own flock. Robert stroked his beard. Well, you both can stay here. Isabella can live in her wagon like before, but you'll have to stay in the bunkhouse with the other workers. We'll see how you do over the winter. If you prove to be good with the sheep, we'll talk about you and Isabella taking my flock to the mountains again, but that's only if you marry her. I'm a God-fearing man and I won't send an unwed couple into those mountains. Ethan and Baraz had to put off getting married until the next spring. This was because Ethan was working hard with the other men on the sheep ranch to learn how to care for sheep. October came and it was time to breed the OS. Ethan was busy with the others moving OS into small pens, turning a ram in with them and making sure all the OS got bred. It was important that no ewe was bred by her own father. Ethan learned to sort the US by the marks on their ears that showed which ram was their father. Once sorted, the USS went into breeding pens, each with a different ram. Each ram could breed about 30. You and the Donovan Ranch had 500 OS and 20 rams. This meant a lot of moving sheep around to make sure all the OS were bred after the breeding. Winter wasn't much different from what Ethan had experienced in the mountains. They moved the sheep from one desert pasture to another to prevent overgrazing. By January, Ethan had learned a lot about raising sheep. He found it was much like raising cattle, but easier because sheep are smaller and the dogs helped keep them together. Ethan also learned the Basque words to direct the herding dogs. He didn't know what they meant until Isabella told him, but the dogs seemed to understand when he used them. March came and it was time to shear the sheep. It was still cold, but the OS needed to be sheared before they had their lambs. If not, their lambs would struggle to find the used teats. Shearing was tough work. Most sheep didn't mind and relaxed during the process, but that made it hard for the men who had to move the sheep around to shear them. Each sheep weighed a lot, and Ethan's arms and legs were sore every night while his hands shook after using the shears all day. In April, the OS started having their lambs. This was more work than Ethan expected. Each ewe had to be checked daily to ensure her lambs were healthy and feeding. Sometimes he had to help lambs find their mother's teats for the first time. He also learned how to help a ewe give birth if she had problems with the Basque shepherd's help. There were risks too, like coyotes, wolves and eagles that could take a lamb. The big guard dogs helped, but at least one man stayed awake all night and day to watch over the flock. During this time, Isabella cooked for the men and Mr. Donovan, but she still spent time with Ethan. If Ethan worked close to the house once she finished cooking and cleaning, she would find Ethan and they would spend time together one day while watching the flock. Ethan asked Isabella if she was ready to marry him. When Isabella said she was ready to get married after they came back from the mountains, Ethan asked her about having a Basque wedding. Isabella smiled. In a Basque town, we would get married in a Basque church. I would wear a special dress and carry special flowers. You would wear special clothes and have a special flower too. After the wedding, we would have a big party with all our friends and family. The women would make Basque food. There would be Basque music and we would all dance. I had a wedding like that with Audie, but here there is no Basque church and no Basque women, only Basque men. I don't need a big wedding. Mr. Donovan can marry us. I will cook food and we can have a small party here. Before going back to the mountains, Ethan frowned. I thought all marriages had to be done by a preacher. Would we really be married? Isabella smiled again. I say yes, the words we say to each other are most important. If you say the wedding words to me and I say them to you, we are married. On the 1st of May, Isabella began packing the wagon for the trip to the mountain. She filled every space with food, extra clothes and everything else they might need. Then she told Ethan she was ready. We will marry and then go to the mountains. Unless you change your mind, Ethan put his arms around Isabella. I've been ready since we got here. They planned to leave for the mountain pastures on the 10th of May, so the wedding would be the Sunday before. I spent all day Saturday cooking, while Ethan and the other shepherds brought the sheep to the big pen at the house. That Saturday night Mr. Donovan found Ethan at the worker's house and asked him to come to his house. Ethan hoped Mr. Donovan just wanted to wish them well. He hadn't said much about Ethan and BZY getting married, so Ethan thought he agreed with it. Mr. Donovan welcomed Ethan into his house and took him to the parlor. He pointed to a chair in front of the fire and asked Ethan if he'd like a drink of Scotch whiskey. Ethan had been taught that alcohol was bad, so he politely said no. Mr. Donovan just smiled. I grew up drinking whiskey and it hasn't hurt me yet, but I respect your choice. That's not why I asked you here. Anyway, I want to tell you a little about how I got here and what I have planned. I was born on a farm in Pennsylvania. We raised some sheep there when I was young, but I always wanted to see more. My grandfather went to Canada to work for the Hudson Bay Company, but never came back. He wanted to return with a lot of money, but ended up dead. We got a letter saying he had died and was buried somewhere up there. My father was 18 at the time and took over the farm. When he got sick, I took over, but I wanted to see more than just sheep all around me. When I was 25, I heard about gold in California, so I gave the farm to my brother and took the railroad to Independence. I then bought a horse and followed the miners to California. Like you, I made some money, but decided there was more money in selling meat to the miners. So I bought a few sheep and started raising lambs to sell to butchers in the gold towns. When gold was found in Idaho, I thought I could make money here too, so I hired Baz's husband to bring my flock from California to here. I took over some land in 1860 and bought more later. So now I own 480 acres. There's not enough food here year-round for the sheep, so I send them to the mountains each spring. Now I have about a TH000S and some rams and I'll have about 200 lambs to sell in the fall. Besides Isabella, I have one other Basque shepherd, who takes the rest of my flock to the mountains. I also have 2 who stay here to take care of the rams and take the lambs and wool to market. One of them took your supplies to you last year. I'm making good money, but times are changing. I made a lot of money with lamb for the miners and wool for uniforms in the Civil War, but the war is ending and the easy gold is running out, just like in California. One of my men said you wanted to buy some of my ewes. After hearing all this, do you still want to do that? Ethan nodded. After spending most of the year with your sheep, I've decided I want to raise sheep instead of cattle. I might not make as much money, but it won't cost me as much to start and I won't need as much land." Mr. Donovan smiled. "How much money do you have to start?" Ethan had almost 400 but decided to tell Mr. Donovan he had 300. He wanted to save something in case things didn't go as planned. "I can spend about 300. Mr. Donovan smiled again. "That will buy you about 40 OS and a couple of young rams. That's not much of a sheep farm." Ethan frowned. "Well, I thought maybe I could keep working for you, Bazi, and I could take our sheep to the mountains when we take yours." Mr. Donovan frowned then. "That's a big assumption. Do you think I'd let Isabella go off into the mountains after you two get married? What if she has a child? You are a man and she is a woman, so that's likely no. Once you marry BZI, she can stay here as a cook. As for you, I already have enough shepherds to take care of things here." Donovan predicted running the sheep ranch was no easy task. Ethan and Berry worked hard. Every single day. They tended to the sheep, fixed the fences and took care of the land. Ethan often rode up to the mountains to check on the sheep and bring supplies to the Basque shepherds. Isabella cooked for the shepherds who stayed at the ranch and kept the house in order. Though it was tough, they were determined to make their dream come true. They began with 80 sheep, just as Mr. Donovan had planned. Each spring brought new lambs and the flock slowly grew. Ethan took careful notes of which OS had the strongest lambs so he could keep the best ones. He also watched over the rams, making sure they were strong and healthy for breeding. Every year, the flock got bigger and bigger as the years rolled by. Ethan and Berry saved every penny they could. They sold lambs and wool at the market and used the money to buy more land and more sheep. Whenever they felt tired or discouraged, they reminded each other of their goal. They wanted to own the ranch free and clear, and they never lost sight of that dream. Their hard work paid off. After 5 years, the flock had grown to almost 1,000 sheep. The ranch now felt like a well-oiled machine. Both Ethan and BZI knew what needed to be done and they did it without complaining. They had learned to work together as a strong team. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their house, Ethan turned to Isabella with a smile. "Do you remember when we first came here?" He asked. "Yes, I do." She replied. "We lived in that little wagon and didn't have much of anything. Look at us now," Ethan said, gesturing to the land around them. "We made our dream a reality." Basie nodded. "We did it together." Mr. Donovan came back once to visit them, but he never stayed long. His brother's illness kept him in Pennsylvania. Eventually he decided to sell the rest of his land in Idaho. Ethan was ready to buy, and with Mr. Donovan's help, he secured a loan. Now the entire ranch belonged to Ethan and BZI. As time went on, their small ranch grew into one of the best in the area. Ethan and Berzy hired more help and bought more land. They became known for their fine wool and strong sheep. People in the area respected them for their hard work and determination. Though the journey had been long and hard, both Ethan and Isabella felt a deep sense of pride in what they had achieved. They had each other and the life they had always dreamed of. Each night as they lay in their real bed in their real house, they knew they had found more than just a home. They had found happiness revisiting the ranch. Donovan once said that after the Civil War ended and the South started growing cotton again, the need for wool dropped a lot. There was still some business in the northern states because of the cold winters during the war. The big market was for soldiers' uniforms, but that was gone. Now, when the gold rush in Idaho slowed down, the price for lamb went down too, but when they found gold in British Columbia, the price went up again. Mr. Donovan also wrote that Christians from Syria were moving to the East Coast. They liked lamb and sheep meat, but there weren't enough sheep there to meet the demand. By that time the railroad made it easy to send lambs to different places. So Ethan started sending some of their lambs to Mr. Donovan, who sold them to butchers in cities in the Northeast. Around this time, several sheep farmers in the upper desert of Idaho decided to leave the sheep business, but Ethan didn't. He managed by controlling the size of his and Mr. Donovan's flock and by Isabella cooking a lot of lamb. Ethan often joked with her that if he ate one more lamb chop, he'd start to say BA instead of talking. Isabella knew he was trying to make light of their money troubles. Their situation got a bit tougher after they had been married for 6 months. The sheep were back from the mountains and Ethan was busy every day from morning to night. One night he noticed that Baz's belly was getting bigger. He ran his hand down her side and over her belly. "Bersy, you seem bigger here than you were before." Berry stroked his side. "That's because I going to have baby. When sheep go to mountains." I think Ethan was almost in shock. "No, you can't. You need women to help you. When that happens and there aren't any women within 100 miles, you'll also have to stop cooking for the shepherds." Isabella laughed. "Well, what expect happen when we spend time together? I'm not sick, so I won't stop working. If I need help, you help me. You help sheep have lambs. I'm same size as sheep, so should be same." Ethan started to say he couldn't, but Baraza put her finger to his lips. "Not talk be with me." A growing family. May of 1871 marked the 5th year Ethan had managed Mr. Donovan's flock as well as his own. It also marked the birth of his and Baz's 3rd child. Little Lauya joined her brothers Zoran and Inigo. All 3 were born with a lot of effort from Berry and a lot of worrying from Ethan, but otherwise without any problems. Zoran was only 4, but wanted to follow Ethan everywhere. Berry kept him inside for naps in the morning and the afternoon. Inigo was 3 and living up to his name, which meant fiery in Basque. Inigo showed just how fiery he could be if he didn't get his way. More than once. He felt Baz's hand on his backside when he threw a tantrum. He soon learned that a slap wasn't the worst punishment. Ethan never hit the boys when they disobeyed. Instead he'd sit them down and listen to their story. Then he'd tell them how they'd done wrong and make them apologize to Barazi. Later in life, they joked that apologizing to their mother was worse than getting a spanking and important VISI. In May, Mr. Donovan came back to the ranch in Idaho with his wife and 2 sons. He looked at the flock of almost 5,000 sheep and told Ethan he'd done a good job. He also said his wife wanted to stay in Pennsylvania and asked Ethan if he was ready to buy him out. After the dinner Isabella cooked, Ethan took Mr. Donovan into the living room, while Brenda, Mr. Donovan's wife, sat in the kitchen to talk. Ethan offered Mr. Donovan a drink of Scotch whiskey and Mr. Donovan frowned. "You haven't taken up drinking, have you?" Ethan grinned. "No, you left one unopened bottle and I just never threw it away." Mr. Donovan smiled. "Then I'll take it with me when we leave now about buying me out. What do you think?" Ethan had thought a lot about that, since he got Mr. Donovan's letter saying he was coming to look at the ranch. Every time he added up everything, he was still short of money. "Mr. Donovan, I've done pretty well, but I don't have enough money. The way I see it, those 5,000 sheep are worth about 2,000. The rest of the land is worth another 1,000 or so. Baraz and I sold 700 lambs this year, but with prices like they are that only brought in about 6,000. I could buy the land and some of the sheep, but not everything." Mr. Donovan stroked his beard and then frowned. "Well, if you don't buy all my sheep, I'll have to sell them to another rancher, but there are only 1 or 2 others left. I might have to ship some of them back to Pennsylvania, but I'm already running 4,000 there and my farm isn't big enough for more. I thought a lot about this on the train. I figured you'd probably double the size of my flock here and maybe have about 1,000 in your own flock. That means you'd be selling about 1,200 lambs this spring. Prices are down, but that means the prices of sheep are down too. I figured you'd have made enough to buy me out. I never expected you to grow my flock to 5,000 sheep. That's 3,000 more than I counted on, and I think that only happened because of you. I think that means I owe you about 1,000 for those extra sheep." Mr. Donovan took a small notebook and a pencil from his jacket pocket. "Let me do some figuring here. Since lamb prices have dropped to about 8 cents a pound, those sheep you think are worth 5 each are actually only worth about 2, so my whole flock is worth around 11,000. The land is worth another, so that makes 11. 000 total. If I were to pay you for those extra 3,000 sheep, it would be 6,000. If my math is right, you could buy me out for 5,000. I'll take 5,000 and you'll have 6,000 sheep and 480 acres of land. I brought the sale papers with me. All I need to do is fill in the details we just discussed. Once I sign them, everything here will be yours and I'll take my wife and kids back to Pennsylvania. How does that sound, Mr. Donovan? His wife and their sons got into their rented carriage the next morning after the breakfast BZI had made. Brenda hugged Razy and wished for their children to grow up strong and healthy. Mr. Donovan shook Ethan's hand with a smile. It's been nice, Ethan. If you ever make it to Pennsylvania, visit my farm. If not, I wish you all the best with your new future. With that simple goodbye, Mr. Donovan snapped the reins on the carriage horses and drove away after they disappeared around a bend in the dirt road. Berry turned to Ethan. What did Mr. Donovan mean about our new future? You said we didn't have enough money to buy all the sheep and land. Do we need to move somewhere else? Ethan put his arm around Berry. No, we have it all worked out. I have the papers in my desk. We own everything now, the land, the sheep, all of it. How did you do that? Ethan smiled. Well, it wasn't me. It was you. I think Mr. Donovan wanted you to have your own place, like you always wanted. He sold everything to me for 5,000. We still have 1,000 left after selling our lambs, and next year we'll keep all the profit. How did I do that? You might not know this, but Mr. Donovan thought very highly of you. He told me that when your husband was killed by that bear, but you still brought his sheep back to the ranch, he considered asking you to marry him. He decided he was too old for you and saw you more like a daughter. That's why he said you couldn't take the sheep to the mountains again and paid us to stay here. He was worried something might happen to you because you were carrying a baby. He said he still doesn't have daughters and his wife can't have more children. He wanted to give the daughter. He never had what he could. Things in that part of Idaho changed a lot over the years, but Ethan and Isabella and the Hart Sheep Ranch stayed the same, even though Ethan wasn't Basque. He agreed with Isabella that their children should grow up with Basque traditions to understand their roots. All three kids learned to speak, read and write both English and Basque. The railroad built a spur that followed the path. The shepherds of the Hart Ranch used to take the sheep to the mountains every spring. Along with the railroad came towns and more people, some of whom were Basque. Zorian met Amaya when he went to Pigori to buy ranch supplies. Her family had moved to Idaho for her father to work as a shepherd. When the ranch he worked for closed, he moved to Pigori and opened a small store that sold Basque foods from Europe, Argentina and Peru. Zoran started offering to go to Pigori whenever Isabella needed anything. Ethan guessed he would soon have a daughter-in-law. That happened in September, and true to Basque tradition, Zoran and Amaya got the Hart Ranch as a wedding present. Zoran and Amaya moved into the same house as Ethan and Isabella. Keeping the tradition of family close, Enigo grew into a strong-willed man who never gave up, since the ranch would go to Zoran. Enigo looked for other opportunities. He found one in Ketchum. Although there were not a lot of Basque people in Kedum, those who lived there missed their culture. Enigo borrowed money from Ethan to build a small inn and restaurant. He hired an older Basque woman to cook, and soon the inn became a gathering spot for shepherds coming down from the mountains. They could eat traditional Basque food, listen to music and even play handball on a court Inigo built when Laura was old enough. She worked for Enigo, but her career was short. She met a young shepherd from another ranch while serving guests at the inn. They got married a year later and had their first daughter. They named her Baraz, and the older Berry had tears in her eyes when she held her granddaughter for the first time. The wool market picked up with the Spanish-American War, creating a need for military uniforms. Demand for wool and lamb grew during conflicts that lasted through the end of the Korean War. Ethan and Isabella saw the start of their sheep ranch's growth, but didn't live to see their great-grandson grow the flock to 1,000 OS by the start of WTWU. They rest side by side in the family cemetery on the ranch. Their headstones are simple, just like they were. Ethan's tombstone simply reads Ethan Hart, husband of Isabella, along with his birth and death dates. Baz's tombstone says Isabella Hart, wife of Ethan, and also lists her birth and death dates behind the modern shed. Ethan's grandson built Baz's old sheep wagon. The one where she met Ethan and they decided to stay together now lies in ruins. It's just a pile of rotting wood and rusted iron. Samuel, Ethan's grandson, thinks he should probably rebuild the wagon. It's a special part of their family's history and the start of their sheep business. One day he will fix it. He knows a carriage maker who has rebuilt at least 2 wagons before. It will cost a lot, but Samuel remembers listening to his great-grandma, Isabella, talk about living in the wagon. It would be a great way to teach his own kids about the old Basque shepherds. Most of those shepherds are gone. Now they run their own businesses. The mountain shepherds are still around, but most of them come from Peru. These days sheep wagons are still used, but they look more like camping trailers. Now they are pulled by trucks and have modern comforts like propane heat and cooking stoves. The trucks also carry supplies and vet equipment. Every October there's a sheep drive from the mountain pastures down the same trail. Ethan and Berzy once followed. It ends in Ketchum with a big festival. Thousands of sheep march through the streets, guided by sheepdogs like Barao and Nesca. Big white guard dogs like Awry and Princesa trot alongside these dogs, protect the sheep from wolves and mountain lions. Though Ketchum is a small town, hundreds of tourists come for the event. They stay at the Best Western or the Limelight hotels and dine in local restaurants. The restaurants serve both Basque dishes and typical American food. If you want real traditional Basque food, ask a local where Igino Jsia is. This restaurant keeps the name of Ao's old inn. Aino is buried in the family cemetery now, but his grandchildren never changed the name. The place serves Basque food made the same way. Isabella and other Basque women learned from their mothers. Many recipes came straight from Bery. She shared them with her granddaughters, who finally wrote them down. You have to ask for directions because they do not advertise. Locals know Aino Jada is where you go for something special. The menu includes dishes like awero, the salted cod, stew berry made for Ethan, along with other traditional appetizers, dishes and desserts. You can enjoy your meal with Basque apple cider made at the restaurant. If you visit on weekends, you might hear a small band playing Basque songs. They play with instruments like a button accordion, a tcu, a drum and a tambourine. You probably won't recognize the songs, but one of them is the same tune Isabella sang when she was happy. Ethan didn't understand the words when he first heard Berzy sing it, but he loved her voice when she translated the song for him. He felt it matched Berzy perfectly and he loved it even more. The song is an old Basque folk song called Atioguan, which means yesterday morning in English. Yesterday morning I woke up early, earlier did the thrush. Yesterday morning I woke up early, earlier did the thrush. With the chant of the thrush, we sleep sweetly. With the chant of the thrush, we sleep sweetly. It chants pleasantly at 5:00 in the morning. It chants pleasantly at 5:00 in the morning. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.